How much could you learn from your users if you got all of them in a room and just watched how they used your product? Today on the podcast, we're interviewing Clarence Tan of Boddle. He has 10 million kids that use his product and had never got all of them in a room to really learn how. And when he finally did, now his company makes millions of dollars in revenue after that one single thing. Maybe you need to listen to your customers some more. Check out today's podcast. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Clarence Tan, who's the founder and CEO of a company called Boddle. They have over 10 million users that use their product. Any of you that have kids, there's probably, 25, 50% chance, something like that. Clarence may tell us. Chance that your kids use their software, cool games for iPad and all that kind of stuff. So Clarence, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm sure you just tell everyone, no, everybody uses my apps. We're more popular than Minecraft. They're going to make a movie about us soon, right? Is that what you tell everybody?
No. That's my hope one day, but not quite there yet. But that's the hope, yeah.
Before we get started, tell us a little bit about Boddle and where was the original idea of that? Where did it come from?
Yeah, of course. I'll dig a little bit into my background to which kind of frames where Bottle came from. And so I went to college for business and finance and realized really early that that wasn't the route for me. But my parents did not want to pay for another degree. And so I played a lot of video games. So I started designing games on the side, met a couple friends online. We were guild mates for this online pirate game. And then we decided hey, let's try building games instead of just playing them all day. And that's kind of how I got into the game design and game development space. Long story short, we ended up building a lot of games for other people. And by happen chance, everybody that hired us wanted educational games. And I just fell in love with that whole experience. And but the issue with educational games I learned really quickly was kids would sniff through the education and know that it's a subpar game. And as a game designer, I'm always I want to build something fun, but you have to build and design mechanics around the academic topic.
Yeah, how do you make it
And
educational?
exactly, and it always was a limiting factor. And so something that I was really fascinated with was, is there a way for us to build uh, learning games or learning experiences that are as fun as games? And so the general idea, and it's not super novel, is what if you built the game first? Don't worry about the learning aspects, make it fun to the point where kids are really engaged, and then sneak in learning content. A very blunt way of saying is hey, imagine a mobile game, Temple Run, or Subway Surfers, and you sneak in math questions instead of ads. It's not as blunt and interruptive as that, but that's kind of the general concept. But that was the idea that I felt so fascinated with because um, if you can embed any content on top of the games, you have full flexibility in terms of how you design the games, but you also have full flexibility in terms of what learning content and topics you can actually um, embed into the experience. And so I kind of just fell in love with that idea. And my co-founder, who is also my wife, we were like, you know what, this is such a great thing to build. Could definitely spend 10, 15 years of our lives building this. But since we're working in the kids space, we definitely believe that, we have to build characters and IP, intellectual property, around the games that we build. So we ended up coming up. It was actually a friend of a friend who worked on the idea with us. How do we visualize what a lifelong learner would look like as a game character? And ultimately, we decided to create these characters where their heads are like these open jars or bottles,
Yeah.
where when kids learn in the game, their heads start filling up so that
Yeah. I
you
like
can
it.
see, yeah. And so that was the idea. And so we branded the company after the characters, and that's why we're called Bottle Learning, and that's the origin of where we came from.
So I love that you identify a problem. You're like, okay, I can solve this. We can build this. We have some experience building these games. But then how did you figure out how to productize this? You're like, hey, how do we monetize this? How do we turn this game, this technology, like actually into a product that you could take to market, get millions of users, get people to pay for it? Like, tell us about that journey.
Yeah, of course. So we started in Kansas City. We've technically been
Woo!
around for uh, 7 years, but the first 2 years was what we call like mom's basement phase. We had no product, just an idea, no money. We had no developers on the team, and so we just went from pitch competition to grant after grant. We would win small amounts of money and then pay someone to build like 5% of it, and then win another grant. There was this grant in Kansas City called Launch KC, and we
Uh-huh.
won that one. It was like fifty
I remember
thousand
that.
dollars. Yeah, we were so excited about it. That actually got us like almost enough to get a prototype out, and with that, we started testing like a barely a prototype with some schools in Kansas City. That was kind of like the first 2 years, really really rough, and then we had enough like screenshots to actually apply for an education accelerator, and they actually accepted us. That was 100K in in investment. That was our first like check-in, and then with that we were able to build a product, go through the accelerator program, and then we officially launched in 2020. And it was this is 2020 like January, and so we were trying to sign
So
up
just the
schools. We
right
had
time and wrong time.
right time and wrong time, right? We saw the difficulty of trying to adopt users before COVID and after
Yeah.
COVID. It was like
Yeah.
totally night and day difference. So it was like first 3 months was us literally going. Um, I was like calling schools up. I was doing like the whole like traditional ed tech approach of like driving into schools, emailing them. Um, we tried a little bit of Facebook ads, never really resonated. And so we went from like zero to maybe like 500 kids in the matter of like 2.5 months. And then COVID happened, and my co-founder Edna, she saw all these like free resource lists start popping up on
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
these different teacher websites, like hey, top free 10 free tools to use um, for the pandemic. And so she just started emailing all of them, whether in teacher Facebook groups or to the websites directly, saying like, "Hey, we kind of made ourselves sound bigger than we actually were, like AT&T funded, whatever, the fast growing gamified tool that's really cool, and we are offering our tool for free. We were free anyways, but then we kind of made it sound like, oh, this is such a great deal
Yeah.
for you to put it on your
COVID
site.
special.
COVID special, exactly. And so that's these sites start putting us on their list, and we ended up making on the White House list as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that went out, and that's when we went from like nothing to like 50,000 kids in the matter of a couple months. And back then, because the product that we had built was a prototype, we never got past like a couple thousand concurrent users before our servers kept crashing. So it was literally us crashing nonstop and then waiting for waiting for school hours to come back down, and then apologizing through email and this tool called Intercom. And then it was that for a couple months before we were able to get our product and our backend up and running well.
Well, so at that point, did you have to raise more money to help fund all the hosting? Because I mean, I imagine the hosting of this sounds like was probably very expensive.
Well, back then it was only a couple thousand thousand users, even though we had tons of signups. So we actually went to raise capital because it was very exciting. Went from nothing to
Yeah.
uh, having tons of users, and so we ended up finding a VC. Technically, they found us in Kansas City, but then they're based in Tulsa, which is why we're here in Tulsa right now. They're called Atento Capital, and we moved over to Tulsa as part of an investment because we were like, you know what? Ideally, we would like to go to Austin, but being in an apartment in Kansas City is pretty much the same as being in an apartment in Tulsa. So let's give it a shot. Let's give it a couple years and see how it goes. So we got VC checks in, and we were so excited, like, oh my gosh, we have money now. We did our pre-seed round. We have money. We're only going to grow from there. And we were we were so wrong, right? Because back then we had no infrastructure in terms of actually um, measuring our active usage and like what were users using in the actual product. But when we finally started tracking, like, hey, how many people signed in a month, right? That was just the basic thing that we tried started querying, and realized that even though we signed up 50,000 kids, we had less than 2,000 monthly active users. And we were looking at our activation rate, like, hey, those who signed up, how many of them actually had kids log in? And I think it was somewhere around like 19 to 20%, something super, super low. So that means that every five people that signed up, only one actually became a user. So our 50,000 sign up number was actually significantly super super small, and we had a crazy leaky bucket, and it was like a super like a shocker for us, like
Well, not only that, like
awakening
what
moment.
percentage of those then actually pay, right? So only 20% convert, but then of the 20%, what percentage of that actually pay, right?
Oh, so being a customer is actually way way far down a couple years later. So because I'm talking about like 2020, 2021 right now,
Yeah,
and
it was still
we
free.
yeah, we haven't started monetizing until like 2023, or haven't even turned it on. Like we didn't know how to do it. We actually hired someone who ended up doing operations for us, to to call schools manually, and boys and girls clubs, to essentially buy our product. But for them, they're like, "Hey, isn't your product free? Like, what am I buying?" And we're just like trying to get them to pay for it, pretty much.
So, how many games do you guys have? I mean, do you have one app and one game, or do you have like 100 games? Like, how do you manage that like breadth versus depth of like all the content and all the stuff that you have?
Yeah, of course. And so initially, when we built the product, we had three games, and the product roadmap was like, "Hey, um, we're gonna build one platform or game, if you will, and when you go in, it's gonna have tons and tons of like different types of like hyper casual games that whether it's a soccer game or basketball game or like a jumping game, you can the content will follow you, but it was to build essentially a game library. So um, we have technically nine games right now, but I'm kind of speeding up the process here. But we're pretty much monetizing only one of them, maybe one
Okay.
and a half. Yeah, and so that's kind of like what I mean when you're mentioning like breadth. It's one of those like we built a lot of games, and then ultimately we how we decided to monetize was to charge kids' parents. If kids liked the game, they could buy game subscriptions and coins to buy outfits and different things that they could bring into the games that they played. But it wasn't very meaningful to players because there wasn't enough value add. There wasn't some sort of like upgrade,
Yeah.
and so it's one of those things where we struggled for a long time. Right, we stayed at around like the 6,000 to 10,000 monthly revenue mark for like pretty much a year, until we started tracking where all of our in-game currency and coins went, and it was like literally almost like 90% to this one game mode. And we had a lot of game developers, but we're just building so many features, so many things that kind of don't tie to where kids are actually spending their time. And so
Yeah.
we kind of like said we had like literally three games that were like 80-90% done, and we just chopped them off and killed them and said, hey, I'm sorry. Like, I know you spent a lot of time on building this game, but we're just gonna kill this game because not only is it taking time to build, but essentially from a player's standpoint, we're building a game that doesn't have very much depth, and you're using that game to compete against a game that is actually bringing you engagement. And
So
so,
what was it about that game that people would use these like virtual currency for?
yeah, so we had a lot of like what we call hyper casual games, right? Which are games that are like very fun, simple, kind of like Flappy Bird. Doesn't have much depth, right? Because Flappy Bird, you just fly around and then you hit something, and then your
And you get
bird
bored
just
with it and
game
you're like, I don't want to play this
exactly.
anymore.
Yeah. And usually those games they monetize through ads as a result, right? They just want to
Yeah.
get as many ad impressions. We had a game mode that so back in like 2022, AT&T launched a grant with us to build like a essentially like, hey, build any game you want. We'll co-market it together, and it was a pet collecting battle game. So essentially something very similar to Pokemon mixed with Candy Crush. It had quite a bit more depth than the hyper casual games. It was like
Okay.
you have your pets, you can use coins to upgrade your pets and evolve them and make them stronger. And so kids are pretty much spending all their time collecting pets and battling each other. And they weren't playing all the hyper casuals. But meanwhile, we hadn't measured that on the back end, which was a really silly mistake. And so we were building all these other games to launch and compete with screen time against the game that, you know, the kids are spending time on. And until we figured that out, we're like, hey, let's pretty much drop all the other games and kill the product pipeline for now and just make the game, the pet battle game, so much more fun. And we made a lot of mistakes along the way because 2022 was when NFTs was really, really hot.
Yeah.
And the hottest NFT game was a game called Axie Infinity.
Yep.
And it was like randomized characters, randomized pets. And we actually launched with that because we wanted to it was a really stupid idea. Like do an um, education NFT kind of thing. That was just like that could be a potential avenue we could go into. But from a actual like game dev standpoint and from a gameplay standpoint, it actually hurt us because kids were like, "Oh, I don't have the pet I want. I don't like this combination." As a result, they just give up because they didn't get the pet that they want. So they won't invest, they won't spend on actually growing a pet. And there was a bunch of onboarding issues too because kids are like, oh, how I don't understand how this pet works because you know abilities and how strong or how weak your pet is based on different attributes like the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the hat, and all these kind of different combinations. It just wasn't a very good experience for kids, and we never got much traction with it until we reverted back to a game that was a little bit more like Pokemon. Like
So let
here's a
me ask you this.
Pikachu.
So is it still an educational game?
It is very educational. It's kind of
Okay.
like the way we've structured it is like you charge up your pets by collecting puzzle pieces, and when you're ready to launch abilities, you have to get your math questions right, or English
Okay.
questions, or reading problems. And so it's one
So
of those like
it is still educational. That's great.
it's still educational. Kids are going through roughly like 40, almost 50 questions per hour when they play the game. So it's at this, they get as much educational practice at the as they're taking a standardized test, pretty much.
So so I guess share with us what was the like key mistake and learning that you had through this process, right? Like it wasn't you weren't listening enough to your users and what your users were really doing, what resonated with them. But also sounds like the it kind of made you change the business model a little bit, right? Like the business model kind of changed a little bit once you kind of figured out this is where your traction was.
Yeah, there are a lot of learnings. If I were to tie it down to like the top, maybe two or three, the first one is just really to like re explore and find out and react to how your users are actually using the app, right? Initially, we did not do a lot of like we would talk to teachers a lot, right? Because teachers are the ones who sign up for the app and get kids on board it. So we talked to teachers a lot. But when it came to like figuring out how kids were playing the game, it became quite a bit of a challenge. And so we thought that we had to build a bunch of back end tracking tools to like are they doing this action or are they doing that action, but
Yeah.
ultimately what ended up working for us is we just literally did a whole classroom tour. We wrapped it up as
Just put a
a
bunch of
hey,
kids in a room and watch them go.
pretty much, right? We did it as like a career day kind of thing. I forgot what month it
Career
was. I think it
day.
was we did career day, talk about tech, and then we would get 20, 30 kids in a room, and we literally went through a bunch of schools in Kansas City and Oklahoma, and just drove past into schools and just started interviewing. And within like the second classroom we got went into, we figured out, oh shoot, we didn't even have to like spend all this time and money to try to integrate with these like um, third party analytics platform. We already know where the issues are. Like I'll give you the first example,
Just
right?
watch them use it.
The we watched them use it, but we were even while we were presenting, like for I'll give you an example, right? We were doing a presentation on like 3D modeling and 3D characters. And one of the things we were selling were these little pets for pets, right? That's how we're making money. Like kids would buy pets for their pets. Um, but you only get the pets after you essentially level up your pets past a certain point. And then when we were showing that character, we had a bunch of kids go, "Oh my gosh, that's so cute. I've never seen that before. Where is that?" And I was like, "No way. Like that's what we are banking on selling and none of them has ever seen it just because that so it was a first time user experience thing, right? They never our
Yeah.
first time user experience never told them or explained to them how to essentially evolve their pets to unlock new abilities and features like the pets that they can buy for their pets. I know it's a little bit confusing. And so it was one of those experiences where we were like, holy crap, like we could have just done this like, school tour, walked into a couple
Yeah.
classrooms earlier
I think
and figured out it. Yeah, the first time experience was broken.
Well, I think that's the key. That's the really key story here, right? Is no matter what kind of software you're building, like you've really got to stay in touch with who your users are, how they actually use your product, the real feedback from them. And part of the challenge is like we're all too close to the problem, right? Like we look at this every day. We understand like you have to click here and you have to do this thing. But all of a sudden you give it to somebody else and they're like they stumble all through it and they're like they don't know what the happy path is and the perfect thing and they don't know like how to get this pet you're talking about and stuff. Like they don't know, right? But we are so used to it and so conditioned to it. So it's like it doesn't matter what kind of software you do, like we all need to spend a certain amount of time doing this kind of research to really understand how it impacts our users. And I think it's funny as you're like, we could have spent all this time, energy, and money doing all this analytics and maybe machine learning or like all these different things, or we got 20 kids in a room for an hour.
Yeah, pretty much. We were trying to be like a little bit sensitive of like, hey, like just walking into a classroom, teachers might not be too happy about it, but it was just really really silly. We could have just walked in, teachers would be glad to invite us, and so we're doing the
Especially if
same
they've
thing
already
with
used the app, right?
parents and
So
yeah. Hmm.
so you weren't totally foreign to them. Like they knew your software. The kids used the app, they had it on the iPads at school or whatever. So you had that going for you.
Yeah, we were trying to do the more like tech scalable thing than the whole like painful walk into it wasn't painful, it's just like I have to drive like into the
Yeah.
middle of the country and then walk into a classroom, which ended up being really really fun, but we were just trying to do the more techy scalable thing and it was a total
Yeah.
mistake.
Well, this is a really cool story. What's great about you guys is you've also figured out how to monetize this and sell basically to consumers, right? And honestly, anytime somebody asks me about selling stuff to consumers, I'm like, I'm not too excited about that idea. For a lot of the challenges you mentioned, like getting revenue, being stuck at a small revenue, trying to figure out how to monetize this, like there's a lot of challenges with this whole path of trying to figure out how to sell to parents. But it sounds like you have now cracked that code. Like you figured out how to sell to parents now and scale this.
Yeah, I think we're on a much better trajectory. I think we still have a lot of room for improvement, but the one thing that I would say we learned for the longest time we've been trying to get teachers because ultimately parents are the customers, right? They're the ones that are pulling out
Yeah.
their credit cards or their Apple Pays to buy the game subscriptions and whatnot. And so we tried a huge initiative. We spent about 6 months on it to get teachers to connect and recommend parents. We already learned from the mistakes, so we started interviewing teachers and realized that a lot of them uh, don't actually want to like send parents more stuff, and so they're actually opposed to trying to like connect Bottle to parents directly. But then we realized that every time we made huge game updates, it was the game updates that was driving revenue and not like the initiatives we have on the teacher side. And so we literally did a huge campaign like, hey, $50, 50 bucks Amazon gift card for like 15 minutes at a time. Something like all we needed was like 20 to 30 interviews. It wasn't like, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that expensive to get the information you need as soon as possible, right? And so we interviewed all these parents who had bought these subscriptions, and we realized that like 84% did not even know what they were buying. They Yeah, they're like, oh, my kid just came up and said they used it in school and they wanted a dinosaur outfit and this pet, and I just felt good because it wasn't Roblox, so I paid for it. And I swiped the credit card. And so it was like, oh, do you know about, like, because our questions initially was like, hey, what feature made you want to buy the subscription? And they're like, I don't even know about like what the subscription does. My kids just asked for it. And so to a certain degree, the real driver for monetizing was more the kid, and the trust that we're building with teachers than to try to, sell the parent, which, we have a huge competitive advantage being an educational tool, parents feeling good about, buying game subscriptions for a learning tool. But ultimately, we just realized that, hey, the wallet that we're currently tapping into is not the learning fund or the learning tools or the ABC mouse wallet. We're tapping into the Roblox wallet. And so for us, or the entertainment wallet. And so that was the
Yeah.
main learning that made us go, okay, if that's the case, then it's pretty clear that we just have to double down on making building more depth around the way we design gameplay features, um, while obviously having to maintain really good quality education so that we can continue being a really useful tool for teachers, because essentially we're getting a lot of engagement from teachers using us for homework assessments and that sort of stuff.
Well, I'm your perfect beta customer because I have 5 kids, so I've got all ages of the spectrum. And my like my 10-year-old, you know what he wanted for his birthday, right? V-Bucks.
Yep,
I think the
it's
kid
either
got like two.
Robux or V-Bucks.
Yeah, he got like $200 worth of V-Bucks to buy, outfits and crap playing Fortnite. And I guess what you want is every kid needs bottle bucks or whatever you call them, right? So
We actually are calling it Bottle Bucks.
So, well, it was great having you on the show, and I think there's a lot that people can learn, and I think the key thing is just a simple keeping in touch with your customers, really understanding who your customers are, how they use the product, and sometimes it's a lot of trial and error, right? You're like, we built all these games, we built all this stuff, but making sure you're listening for for that signal through the noise. It's like that of all this stuff, we finally figured out like this was the one magic thing, and now you guys are doing millions of dollars in revenue, and conceivably like could get to tens of millions of dollars in revenue, which is probably mind-boggling at this point.
Yeah, we scaled up pretty quickly in the past, I would say 8 months, and so we're very
That's
optimistic about
incredible.
where it's going,
Yeah.
and we just feel really good that, hey, it's actually helping kids learn, and
Yeah.
so for that we feel really good about not just the growth but also like the growth and impact that we're making.
I love it. I'm gonna make sure my kids give this a try, and maybe I need to buy some bottle bucks. So, Clarence, thank you so much for being on the show today, man.
Of course, glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Thanks for tuning into Product Driven today. If you're passionate about building user-centric tech products, join over 30,000 tech leaders who receive the Product Driven newsletter directly in their inbox every week. Visit fullscaleteam.com/newsletter to sign up today for our newsletter. You can also view all of our episodes on YouTube and join over 50,000 others. And please follow me, Matt Watson, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.